In the fading light of a remote mountain road, Justin Carter, an experienced traveler, found himself in a life-threatening situation deep in the Great Smoky Mountains after losing control of his vehicle on a winding back road and crashing into a steep ravine. Injured and pinned near the wreckage, isolated and in pain, his desperate cries unexpectedly attracted a nearby bobcat. For a man haunted by predators, this feels like the end. But in the heart of the unforgiving wilderness, survival sometimes comes from the most unexpected places. Instead of a threat, this wild creature would become an unlikely savior. How could an animal Justin had always viewed with caution become his only hope for survival? This is a story of unlikely saviors, second chances, and the remarkable truth about what happens when fear meets compassion in the heart of the wilderness. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the winding back roads of the Great Smoky Mountains as Justin Carter tightened his grip on the steering wheel. At 42, he had traveled to some of the most remote corners of the American wilderness, but the Smokies had always held a special allure. This trip was meant to be a much-needed respite from the crushing deadline of his latest wildlife photography book. Justin rolled down the window, letting the crisp mountain air fill his lungs. The scent of pine and damp earth reminded him of childhood camping trips with his father. Those memories always came with a shadow, though, the day his father nearly died after a close encounter with a mountain lion. Justin had been only 10 years old when he watched the massive cat spring from the undergrowth, his father's screams echoing through the forest before the rangers arrived. Though his father survived, Justin had never fully shaken his wariness of wild predators. "Focus on the road," he muttered to himself, noticing how the light was fading faster than he'd anticipated. He needed to reach his cabin before nightfall, and the narrow road demanded his full attention. That's when it happened. A deer darted across the road, materializing from the forest like a ghost. Justin swerved instinctively, too sharply. The world spun in a sickening blur of trees and sky as his SUV skidded on loose gravel. He felt the vehicle tilt, then tumble. The airbag exploded in his face, and a white-hot pain shot through his left leg as metal crumpled around him. When the motion finally stopped, Justin found himself pinned in the driver's seat, the vehicle resting at an awkward angle partway down a steep ravine. His head throbbed where it had struck the side window, and when he tried to move his leg, agony ripped through him like a serrated blade. "Help!" he called out, his voice sounding thin and insignificant in the vast wilderness. "Somebody help me!" But there was no answer except the soft rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. The road above was rarely traveled, especially in the off-season, and his cell phone showed no service. Cold reality seeped in like the chill mountain air. No one knew exactly where he was, and it might be days before anyone noticed he was missing. As the minutes stretched into hours, Justin drifted in and out of consciousness. Night fell fully, bringing with it an oppressive darkness and a bone-deep cold that made his teeth chatter. Each movement sent fresh waves of pain through his injured leg, but he knew staying awake was crucial. Hypothermia in these mountains was a silent killer. "Help!" he called again, his voice now a raspy moan. "Please, anyone." Something moved in the darkness beyond the broken windshield. Justin froze, straining his eyes to see through the gloom. A pair of reflective eyes caught what little moonlight filtered through the trees, and Justin's heart pounded painfully against his ribs. A bobcat emerged into a patch of moonlight, its tawny coat silvered by the night. It was smaller than a mountain lion, but unmistakably wild and powerful, with tufted ears and a muscular frame. Justin had photographed bobcats before, always from a safe distance with a telephoto lens. Now, with nothing between them but shattered glass, primal fear coursed through him. The bobcat tilted its head, seemingly curious about the strange metal object and the injured human inside it. It took a step closer, then another, its movements lithe and deliberate. Justin desperately reached for his coat pocket, where he kept a small pocket knife. If the animal attacked in his vulnerable state, he would have little chance, but he wasn't going to die without a fight. His fingers had just closed around the knife when a wave of dizziness washed over him. The blood loss and cold were taking their toll. His vision tunneled, darkening at the edges. "No," he whispered, fighting to stay conscious. The bobcat was even closer now, its whiskers catching the moonlight. "Stay back." The world faded to black. Warmth. That was the first sensation that registered when Justin regained consciousness. Warmth, and the crackling sound of a fire. For a moment, he thought he must be dreaming. Or perhaps he had died after all, and this was some unexpected afterlife. He opened his eyes to find himself lying on a worn leather couch, heavy quilts tucked around him. A stone fireplace crackled nearby, casting dancing shadows across wood-paneled walls. A rustic cabin, simply furnished but immaculately kept. Relief flooded through him, quickly followed by confusion. How had he gotten here? Who had rescued him? Justin tried to sit up and gasped as pain shot through his splinted leg. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," came a gravelly voice from across the room. "That's a nasty break you've got there." Justin turned his head to see an older man rising from a rocking chair. He was tall and lean, with a weathered face, silver hair, and the kind of deep tan that comes from years outdoors rather than weekends at the beach. He looked to be in his 60s, but moved with the ease of someone much younger as he crossed to Justin's side. "Name's Mark Holden," the man said, offering a calloused hand. "Found you about a mile from here, down in Crawford's Ravine." Justin shook the man's hand weakly. "Justin Carter. Thank you for saving me. I didn't think anyone would find me way out there." Mark's expression shifted, a mixture of amusement and something else Justin couldn't quite place. "Well, I can't take all the credit." He gestured toward the window. "You've got him to thank, too." Justin followed Mark's gaze and felt his blood freeze in his veins. There, curled up on a windowsill as casually as a house cat, was the bobcat from the crash site. The animal's amber eyes met Justin's, unblinking. "Jesus!" Justin jerked back, agitating his injured leg and sending a fresh wave of pain through his body. He frantically looked around for something to defend himself with. "There's a wild animal in your house." Mark chuckled, the sound warm and reassuring. "Easy now. That's just Toby. He's the one who found you." Justin stared at the man, wondering if he had suffered a head injury too. "That's a bobcat, a wild predator." "Toby's special," Mark said, crossing to the windowsill and actually scratching the bobcat behind its ears. The animal leaned into the touch like a domestic cat might, its eyes half closing in apparent contentment. "He's been with me for 7 years now. He's the reason you're alive." Justin watched the impossible interaction with disbelief. "What do you mean?" Mark settled back into his rocking chair, the bobcat jumping down from the windowsill to sit at his feet. I was fishing at Crawford Creek when I heard Toby making a ruckus, a kind of yowling he only does when something's wrong. I followed him, and he led me straight to your vehicle. You were unconscious, hypothermic. If we'd found you an hour later..." He trailed off, the implication clear. "But how?" Justin gestured weakly at the Bobcat. "Why would a wild animal do that?" Mark's weathered face softened. "Maybe because he knows what it's like to need saving." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You up for a story? Might help take your mind off that leg." Justin nodded, still eyeing the Bobcat warily. "7 years ago, I was still working as a park ranger," Mark began, his voice taking on the cadence of a practiced storyteller. "Got a call about wildlife control tranquilizing a problem bobcat near some vacation cabins. Standard procedure. But then a storm hit. One of those sudden mountain downpours that turns every creek into a raging torrent. Outside, rain began to patter against the windows, as if summoned by Mark's words. I was checking the conditions when I saw something in Elk Creek, a small body being swept downstream. It was this fella here." He nodded at Toby. "Just a juvenile then, probably washed away after being sedated. He was drowning, too groggy from the tranquilizer to swim." Mark paused, his eyes distant with memory. "The smart thing would have been to let nature take its course. Bobcats aren't endangered, and trying to rescue a wild predator, even a drugged one, isn't in any ranger manual I've ever read." The rain fell harder now, drumming against the roof of the cabin. "But I couldn't just watch him die," Mark continued. "So I jumped in after him. Nearly got myself killed in the process. That creek was running fast and cold. Managed to grab him by the scruff and drag him to shore. I figured he'd run off once the drugs wore off." Mark reached down to stroke the Bobcat's spotted fur. "But he didn't. Followed me home that night, watched me from the trees for days. Eventually started coming closer. Been with me ever since." Justin stared at the Bobcat with new eyes. "That's unbelievable." "Life's full of unbelievable things if you're paying attention," Mark replied with a smile. "Toby's made a habit of leading me to animals in trouble. Injured deer, lost fawns. First time he's ever led me to a human, though." Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the Bobcat's ears twitched at the sound. "I've radioed for help," Mark added. "But with this storm moving in, the rescue team won't make it up here until morning. You're safe for tonight, though." Justin nodded, thoughts swirling. The story was incredible, yet the evidence was right before his eyes. A bobcat, a notorious solitary predator living peacefully with a human. Still, decades of fear were not so easily dismissed. "My father was attacked by a mountain lion when I was a kid," Justin found himself saying. "Nearly killed him." Mark nodded solemnly. "Mountain lions and bobcats are distant cousins, but they're very different animals. Still, I understand your caution. Wild is wild, and Toby's no house cat. We've built trust, him and me, but I never forget what he is." As if understanding the conversation, Toby rose and stretched, then padded silently to the door. Mark got up to let him out into the rainy night. "He comes and goes as he pleases," Mark explained. "Some nights he sleeps by the fire, others he hunts. He's free to return to the wild anytime, but he chooses to stay." Justin watched the bobcat disappear into the darkness. "Why do you think he saved me?" Mark considered this as he stoked the fire. Animals are smarter than we give them credit for. Maybe he recognized another soul in trouble. Or maybe, he added with a wink, he just knows I get lonely up here and thought I could use the company. Despite his pain and the strangeness of his situation, Justin found himself smiling. Thank you again, for everything. Get some rest, Mark advised. Tomorrow's another day. Justin awoke to sunlight streaming through the cabin windows and the aroma of coffee brewing. His leg ached dully beneath the splint Mark had fashioned, but the fog of confusion and fear that had gripped him the previous night had largely dissipated. Morning, Mark called from the small kitchen area. How's the leg? Better, I think, Justin replied, carefully shifting to a sitting position. Still hurts, but clearer-headed today. Mark brought over a steaming mug. Good. Rescue team radioed. They'll be here in about 2 hours. Justin accepted the coffee gratefully, then noticed Toby curled up on a rug near the fireplace, grooming his paws with methodical precision. In the daylight, the Bobcat looked simultaneously more ordinary and more remarkable, clearly wild with his spotted coat and tufted ears, yet utterly at ease in this human dwelling. He came back, Justin observed, still keeping a cautious eye on the predator. Always does, Mark replied, settling into his rocking chair with his own mug. Look, I know you're still wary of him, but Toby's not interested in hurting you. If he wanted to do that, he'd have done it when he found you helpless in that ravine. Justin couldn't argue with that logic, but decades of instinctive fear were hard to overcome. I understand that intellectually, but you're still seeing the animal that almost killed your father, Mark finished for him. I get it. Fear's a powerful thing, especially when it's rooted in childhood. They sat in companionable silence for a while, sipping their coffee. Justin found his gaze repeatedly drawn to the Bobcat, studying its movements, its apparent comfort in this unnatural setting. I've spent my career photographing wild animals, Justin said eventually. Always from a distance, always with barriers between us. I thought I understood them. Mark smiled. And now? Now I'm not so sure, Justin admitted. What you and Toby have, it goes against everything I believed about wild predators. Nature's full of exceptions, Mark replied. Individual animals are just that. Individuals. They have personalities, quirks, the capacity to form bonds that defy our neat categories. As they talked, Mark shared more stories of his years with Toby. The Bobcat's preference for fresh trout over venison, his habit of bringing Mark gifts of unharmed mice or chipmunks, his curious obsession with the sound of classical music on Mark's old record player. With each anecdote, Justin felt his fear gradually giving way to fascination. Do you think he'd let me touch him? Justin asked hesitantly. Mark considered this. Toby makes his own choices about who touches him and when. But you could offer your hand, see what he decides. Heart pounding, Justin slowly extended his hand, palm up toward the Bobcat. Toby regarded him with those inscrutable amber eyes, neither approaching nor retreating. He's thinking about it, Mark said softly. That's a good sign. Just then, Toby's head snapped up, ears pivoting toward the window. In one fluid motion, he leapt to the windowsill, body suddenly tense. What is it, boy? Mark asked, rising to join him. The Bobcat let out a short, urgent sound somewhere between a chirp and a growl, then jumped down and pawed at the door. He wants out, Mark said, frowning slightly, and he's agitated about something. Mark opened the door, and Toby darted into the surrounding forest without hesitation. Is that normal? Justin asked, unsettled by the Bobcat's sudden departure. The leaving, yes. The urgency, no. Mark stood in the doorway, peering out at the trees. Something's bothering him. Mark grabbed a jacket from a hook by the door and slipped it on. I'm going to follow him, see what's got him worked up. What about the rescue team? Justin asked. There's still an hour out at least. I won't go far. Mark hesitated, then added, I'd invite you along, but with that leg. Justin surprised himself with his next words. Help me up. I want to come too. Mark raised an eyebrow. You sure about that? It won't be comfortable. I'm sure, Justin said firmly. Yesterday, he'd been terrified of the Bobcat. Today, he felt an inexplicable need to understand what had sent Toby racing into the woods. With Mark's help and a makeshift crutch fashioned from a sturdy branch, Justin hobbled outside. The morning air was crisp and clean after the night's rain, the forest glistening with droplets that sparkled in the sunlight. He headed this way, Mark said, pointing to a narrow trail that wound between the trees. We'll take it slow. The going was difficult with Justin's injured leg, but determination drove him forward. They followed the path for perhaps a quarter mile, Mark occasionally stopping to check for signs of Toby's passage. A disturbed patch of leaves, a fresh paw print in the mud. Listen, Mark whispered suddenly, holding up a hand. Justin strained his ears and caught it, a series of high-pitched mewling sounds coming from somewhere ahead. That's not Toby, Mark said, his expression concerned. Those are kittens. They pushed forward more quickly now, Justin gritting his teeth against the pain in his leg. The sounds grew louder, more distressed. Finally, they emerged into a small clearing and stopped short at the sight before them. Toby stood protectively over what appeared to be a hollow beneath an uprooted tree. And huddled in that hollow were two tiny bobcat kittens, their spotted fur matted and dirty, their small bodies trembling with fear or cold or both. Well, I'll be, Mark breathed. Bobcat kittens, and not Toby's, he's male. Must have been orphaned somehow. As they watched, Toby gently nosed one of the kittens, encouraging it to stand. The little creature wobbled on unsteady legs, letting out another pitiful mewl. He led us right to them, Justin said in wonder. He knew they needed help. Mark nodded slowly. Seems that way. He turned to Justin, eyes serious. This is rare behavior, even for Toby. Bobcats are solitary by nature. Males typically have nothing to do with kittens, even their own. So why would he care about these orphans? Justin asked, unable to tear his eyes from the scene. Mark shook his head. Some questions don't have neat answers. Compassion isn't exclusive to humans. That's all I know for sure. They watched as Toby continued to tend to the kittens, licking their fur clean, nudging them to their feet, seemingly checking them for injuries. The gentleness of his actions was at stark odds with everything Justin had ever been taught about wild predators. What happens to them now? Justin asked softly. If the mother's truly gone, they won't survive on their own, Mark replied. They're too young, maybe 3 or 4 weeks old. What about a wildlife rehabilitation center? Mark nodded. That's their best chance. The rescue team coming for you can take them too. A thought occurred to Justin. Did Toby know? That we'd call for help? That we could save them? Mark smiled. I've learned not to underestimate what Toby understands. He knelt carefully in the damp leaves, extending a hand toward the kittens. Let's see if Mama's truly gone or just hunting. Toby watched Mark approach the kittens but made no move to stop him, instead stepping aside as if granting permission. Mark gently examined each kitten, his movements slow and deliberate. No obvious injuries, he reported, but they're dehydrated, hungry, been alone at least a day, I'd guess. Justin leaned heavily on his makeshift crutch, mesmerized by the interaction. In his decades of wildlife photography, he'd captured countless images of predators and prey, of life and death in the natural world. But he'd never witnessed anything like this. A wild bobcat apparently rescuing orphaned kittens, leading humans to them deliberately to ensure their survival. "I want to photograph this," he said suddenly. "Not for publication, just to remember." Mark glanced up, surprised. "You're not afraid anymore?" Justin considered this. "I'm still cautious, but I'm seeing him differently now. Seeing all of this differently." With Mark's help, Justin lowered himself to the ground, stretching his injured leg out before him. He took out his phone, miraculously unbroken in the crash, and began to capture what he was witnessing. Toby, alert and watchful. The kittens, tiny and vulnerable. The sunlight dappling through the trees onto this unexpected tableau of interspecies compassion. "You know," Mark said as he carefully gathered the kittens into his jacket, "some Native American traditions view bobcats as symbols of patience, of seeing truth beyond surface appearances." Justin nodded, thinking of how his own preconceptions had been challenged in the span of just 24 hours. "I can see why." As they prepared to head back to the cabin, Toby leading the way as if guiding them home, Justin felt a profound shift in his perspective. The fear that had been his companion for so many years seemed to have loosened its grip, replaced by something more complex. Respect, certainly, but also a newfound wonder at the capacity for connection between different species. "Some days change you," Mark remarked as they walked slowly back along the trail, the rescued kittens mewling softly inside his jacket. "I think this might be one of those days for you." Justin smiled, watching Toby move gracefully ahead of them, pausing occasionally as if to make sure they were still following. "I think you're right." 3 months later, Justin stood on the porch of his home in Colorado, staring at the framed photograph hanging by the door. It showed a bobcat silhouetted against a sunset, 2 small kittens at its feet. Not a professional shot, just one he'd taken with his phone that day in the Great Smoky Mountains. But it had become his most cherished image. His leg had healed well, though the doctors said he might always walk with a slight limp. A small price to pay, he thought, for the lesson he'd received. The kittens had been successfully rehabilitated at a wildlife center in Tennessee. According to Mark's latest email, they were thriving, growing strong and wild as nature intended. They would be released back into the mountains when they were old enough to survive on their own. And Toby? Toby had returned to Mark's cabin after the rescue team arrived, watching from the windowsill as the humans with their stretchers and medical equipment tended to Justin and the orphaned kittens. When Justin was loaded into the helicopter, the bobcat had sat perfectly still, amber eyes fixed on him until the aircraft lifted away. Justin had sent Mark a copy of his newly published book, Unexpected Kindness, Reimagining Wildlife, filled with photographs and stories that challenged conventional narratives about wild animals. The dedication read simply, "For Mark and Toby, who taught me to look beyond fear to see the truth." His phone chimed with a new message. It was from Mark, accompanied by a somewhat blurry photo of Toby stretched out before the cabin fireplace. He still looks out the window some mornings, the message read. Think he might be waiting for you to visit again? Justin smiled. He'd already booked his flight for next month. Some connections once formed deserved to be honored. He ran his fingers over the photograph by the door, tracing the outline of the bobcat that had saved his life twice over. Once by leading help to his crashed vehicle, and once by leading him to a new understanding of the wild world he'd spent his career documenting. "See you soon, old friend," he murmured to the image. Then he turned back to his desk, where an outline for his next book awaited. Its working title, The Wisdom of Toby: What a Bobcat Taught Me About Life, Fear, and Redemption. Outside, the Colorado sky deepened toward evening, stars beginning to appear one by one. The same stars that shone over the Great Smoky Mountains, over a simple cabin where a man and a bobcat defied categorization, over forests where wild and tame were not opposites but points on a spectrum of possibility. And somewhere in those mountains, two young bobcats grew stronger each day, living proof that compassion could cross the boundaries humans so carefully constructed between species. Their very existence a reminder that in the most unexpected moments, the most unlikely teachers could show us the way toward a more complete understanding of the world and our place within it. For Justin Carter, the lesson would last a lifetime. And it had begun with a moment of terror in a ravine, with the approach of a wild predator who had seen not prey, but a fellow creature in need.